Today I'm going to do the flooring in my truck. I put insulation down, make a start on underfloor heating. I'm also going to be talking a little bit about building material toxins. So when I designed this, I was going to put my insulation up in here, and to give me more headroom and limit the height of the vehicle. But I've had second thoughts because I think water will get stuck up, moisture will get stuck in between the insulation and whatever's here, and I just think it's not a good idea. The problem with that is I've made this box Brendan height, and putting insulation in the flooring is going to decrease the headroom, so I'm going to have to do a workaround with that. I'm using polyiso insulation. It's got about twice the insulation capacity of polystyrene. It's quite expensive though, so I managed to find this stuff which is sort of second grade and got it about half price. So now we can chuck the tubing in the floor. This is where I'm not really sure if it's going to work long term. I've had to compromise a bit. I'm trying to keep the height of the vehicle as low as possible while still keeping some headroom. To do that I've had to use thin insulation, and to do that I'm going to have to use a small diameter pipe. So I'm using an 8mm OD, 6mm ID nylon tube. Nylon's great plastic, it's quite resistant to high temperature, to moderate temperature. And I'm just going to run 10 of these in parallel the length of the truck. So we'll chuck that in, and yeah, I guess in a year or so I'll know if it's a good idea. Okay, so that's my aluminium all put down. I've put aluminium tape around for a moisture barrier to the floor. I've also chucked in the lines I've drawn on, red lines for my water pipes and black lines for battens, and I mapped them out as well. Okay, so I've gone to the hardware store and bought some flooring samples. We'll go through them. This would be ideal. It's nice and thin, so that's going to help with my headroom a bit. It's really cheap. It's PVC, it's quite durable. Two things about it I don't like. One, I don't like things pretending there's something they're not. So this is a plastic plank pretending it's wood. And that just sort of means I put it in the bin straight away. But the other thing is it's PVC. PVC is probably one of the most toxic plastics that's commonly available. It outgasses fumes that, you know, are dangerous for you. And considering that effect that I'm putting heating underneath means that it's going to outgas even more. So there's a YouTuber called Max, previously Max and Lee, who's building a van at the moment and pretty much filling his entire van with PVC. All the cupboards and partitions and things like that are all made of PVC foam. And he thinks it's great, but I'm not sure he comprehends the sort of potential for what long-term health effects it could give him. In such a small space, it's quite bad because those fumes can build up quite quickly. Okay, so that brings us on to this one, which is a laminated bamboo. I really like bamboo. It's fast growing, it's sustainable, it's hard wearing. Yeah, it's really cool. So this here is a true laminate bamboo. So he's got a veneer of bamboo on the top, and then an engineered timber, and then a bit of wood on the base. So with engineered timbers, they're typically just a sawdust that's bound together with a resin, and that's normally a urea or phenolic formaldehyde based glue. Sometimes it can be a melamine formaldehyde. The problem with that is formaldehyde is categorized as a group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So that puts it in the same category as asbestos, arsenic, PCBs, Chernobyl, things like that. There was also a good example of formaldehyde in small spaces going wrong a little while ago. In 2005, I think, Hurricane Katrina came through the States. FEMA built a bunch of trailers, caravans, whatever, to distribute to homeless people. And 2006, people started getting sick. They started getting nosebleeds, sore eyes, sore throats, flu-like symptoms, nausea, fatigue, things like that. And potentially in the future, cancer. So what ended up happening, I think 2012-ish, there was a class action lawsuit. And I think 55,000 people who suffered from the formaldehyde exposure, I think won something like $40 million compensation. So that was probably because most of the processed timbers in the caravans were made of a urea-based formaldehyde glue. So you can tell a urea-based formaldehyde glues quite easily because, I mean, they're in MDFs, plywoods, non-structural plywoods, OSBs, things like that. You can tell them because they're the type of glue that makes the wood swell or come apart when it gets wet. So any of those glues are most likely urea formaldehyde, and that's the least stable formaldehyde resin that's around, and it's the most likely to give off formaldehyde fumes. It probably in the concentrations of about 10 times formaldehyde fumes come off the urea formaldehydes than come off the phenolic or the melamine formaldehydes. So with that, I got this sample here, which is a more solid bamboo, which is actually not solid, but it's strands of bamboo that are stuck together, glued together. So what I'm going to do is have a go at measuring them. I bought this cheap formaldehyde meter from China, and unfortunately it doesn't seem to measure formaldehyde, or it can't discern formaldehyde. So it'll have a cheap tin oxide sensor in here. It might have 2 elements in it. One might have a dopant on it to make it more sensitive to formaldehyde, but it can't discriminate formaldehyde from a lot of other gases, so it ends up being useless. So this is another thing I bought a little while ago, and I bought this to quantify different sized dust particles in the air. And it doesn't happen to do that, but it does measure formaldehyde, so I'm going to use this as my formaldehyde meter. So that pretty much has nothing. It's just hovering around with the electrical noise of the sensor in here. I mean, this shouldn't even have this digit on here. It should be sort of blanked off like that. So now we'll chuck in the laminated bamboo and see how that tests. So we can see that's actually leaching out quite a lot of formaldehyde. So with that, I'm not going to be using the laminated one, and I'm only going to be using the solid bamboo. The solid bamboo looks pretty cool, but it's the thickest of all, which is going to minimize my headroom, which is not ideal, but it doesn't put out formaldehyde. And really cool to be able to measure and know that the products are safe that I'm putting in my van, or from the formaldehyde standpoint at least. Because formaldehyde is one of the most insidious chemicals around in common building materials, if you're interested in having a formaldehyde meter that works, not something like this, I'll link down below formaldehyde meters that I know work, so that you can quantify and you can test your own products before you put them in your build. I did exactly the same thing actually for a bench top. I was going to put a bamboo bench top in. I bought the bench top, I bought it home. I should have bought the meter to the hardware store, but I bought the bench top home, put the meter in there, and the formaldehyde levels were through the roof. So again, I just took it back, said, look, formaldehyde levels too high, and they just gave me my money back. So really cool to be able to do that. So that was all pretty easy. It all went down not too bad. I mean, a little bit of a pain, but not too bad. It's still Brendan height, only just providing I don't have any shoes on, which I'm not going to have shoes on anyway. And if you're taller than me, then yeah, I don't really care. Because this is my first build, I always learn something at every stage I make. So at the end of each video now, I'm going to just put a bit of a hindsight in and what I'd do differently. So with this particular part, I'd make the headroom a little bit higher if, you know, I knew I was going to be putting that insulation on the inside. The aluminium I put down was 0.7 millimeters thick. I'd probably bring that up to 1.2 to let the heat spread a bit easier and a bit more solid. And the other thing I'd probably do, instead of using that flooring adhesive, I'd use just a polyurethane in a gun. But I don't think the flooring adhesive is going to bond to the aluminium particularly well, but it does create a conduit for heat to travel from the aluminium to the floor. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.